these are all great things to do with native plants too, in the establishment phase. So, and plant 3 times the density you would want at maturity of planting just to ensure success. So if you want, there's likely you're going to have some loss in the early weeks and months. But they really respond to some TLC. I've helped with a planting here on the island, where the individual planting, planted some 100 plants and mulched them and watered very religiously. And those were big bushy plants by the end of the growing season. So they really responded to it very well. Okay, let's talk about where to source plants and seeds. So start with a local nursery. The state forest has trees and shrubs. For them, you have to buy a lot at a time. So a good tree nursery that I've had good luck with is called Chief River Nursery. They're located north of Milwaukee. They have trees and shrubs that are native for up here. You can get them, especially if you're looking to plant, you want to plant a couple viburnums and a couple of dogwoods and a couple oaks and that kind of thing. You can get a lot of plants for under $100. And they're mostly going to come bare root, which is actually really preferable. You just got to do all your planting in the spring. Door Landscape is located, I think it's around Ephraim or Fish Creek, but they have a great selection too of native plants, and they're really active in the native plant community on the peninsula. So I've stopped in there a time or two and chatted with folks, but they have a big selection. And then Hoop Blossom, we're mostly doing herbaceous perennial plants and don't have a lot of woody plants right now. There's a couple exceptions. We have a couple shrubs and a vine, but seed sources, Prairie Nursery, Prairie Moon Nursery, Agro-Ecol mostly have prairie seed. It's hard to start woody plants from seed, although you can. And then you could source plants from the wild, but with caution and only under specific circumstances. Step one, I'd say, is gather seed. That's the lowest impact you can have. But some plants are very hard to collect seed on. Some are very easy. So, and you need to be really on top of it in terms of timing, right? So you got to know where that Pearly Everlasting is, or New England Aster, and then you got to go back there when the seed is matured, but before it blows off in the wind. So it can be a challenge. You can dig up only on land under construction when plants are dormant, preferably. You often don't get the option when it's under construction. But if they're going to do a big build in a site next to you, or they're going to tear out an area where they're putting in a road, and there's some nice plants in the ditch along the road, get in there and dig those up. Probably ask permission first, but that's a great way to go. Otherwise, you could dig where dense stands are present and take less than 10%. I made that percentage up, but that's a pretty good safeguard. And only on land where you have permission or your own land, and only when plants are dormant, or preferably when plants are dormant. An example of what I'm talking about here, behind our barn, we have an area where there's probably 200 young trout lily leaves sprouting up from the ground. And, those are probably all connected and rhizomatically, but, we've been here for 5-6 years, and they never mature year after year. I don't know if they have too much shade there from the barn or what it is, but they come back every year. So I've started to come in there and dig up a few at a time and plant them elsewhere, out in the forest or in some garden beds that I have. And I try to do it when they're not actively growing, so get them when they're dormant, and that's challenging too. You got to stake them or something like that to be able to go back and find them. So just a cautionary. 2 years ago, Alessandra and I were walking in Jackson Harbor Ridges, and it was late in the season, and the fringe gentian was blooming, or was just finishing blooming. And we had been in there recently and just went back for one last walk. and we found 3 big holes dug into the ground. And we're pretty sure that someone was digging up fringed gentian. Um, and that's heartbreaking. That's a plant that has a hard enough time. Um, and the habitat that's conducive to its growth is pretty minimal, is what I mean. But also, when you plant fringed gentian in your home landscape, it's very likely not going to thrive, right? Um, it likes that really specific environment, the kind of alkaline, sandy soils. It can handle the extremes um, of conditions there, right on the lakeshore edge.
Yeah.
So, you know, as a cautionary tale, don't do that. I don't think many of you would, but keep encouraging others not to as well. Tips for sourcing. So if you want to get some wildflower seed, go to a trusted source. Don't go online and buy a wildflower seed mix. It's likely not Wisconsin native. I've seen wildflower seed mixes that were wild in name only. I mean, they had cosmos and zinnias in them. So nothing wrong with those plants. We grow them for cut flowers, but they're not what you're thinking. And generally speaking, avoid varieties and cultivars. So like they can be more beautiful. You can get a double coreopsis that has petals all the way through. It's a gorgeous flower, and it's very beautiful, but it's so full of petals that pollinators can't even get into the flower to extract pollen or nectar, or get any food from it. So it's basically of limited value from an ecosystem standpoint. Okay, deer. A few tips. Even if you have a deer-resistant plant, deer will eat anything once, especially when they're young. So be prepared to protect them. A great suggestion that someone gave me was spray deer repellent early on in the spring when deer are just starting to get out of the woods and test out the environs again in the late spring. Make sure you have some deer repellent on and do it for a couple of weeks, and the deer start to learn that this is a plant to avoid, and then you don't have to spray it all year long. And use fencing and tree tubes and sculptural barriers that confuse deer. An example of a sculptural barrier, you could just string up some fishing line that of a heavy weight that kind of goes around an area. It's not, you can't see it. It's still attractive, or doesn't take away from the attractiveness, the beauty of the site. But also deer can get a little confused. Just do it every 12 inches or so, one on top of the next, and deer could avoid that area. Or make some sculptural barriers around a specific plant that you want, just with some some wooden dowels or something like that, just to kind of confuse them. Deer don't have great depth perception. So if you kind of do double fencing or some kind of weird angled barriers, they get really lost and confused. Bob Young has done that before on his site, and he's done it with a couple of plants, on his land that looks really cool, and it keeps the deer off the plant. Okay, we're going to talk about specific species now. Red oak. First, some woody species. Red oak can play host to over 500 species of insect, feeding multitudes of birds indirectly as well as directly with mast with acorns in the fall. Do not time. So it's a great native plant to get started early on, so it can develop. I really encourage you to plant bare root, and that you want to plant those in the spring or the fall. And oak likes full sun, or again 6 hours plus of sunlight. Sugar maple is a great one to plant as well, part of the beech maple complex on the island. Young trees are heavily browsed by deer, so if we walk out into our beech maple forest on Sioux Olms that's north of us, and so it's not ours, but connected to our land. and we see young beech trees everywhere. We don't see any young maples. So plant a sugar maple, plant a red maple, um, plant bare root in the spring again, and use a tree tube for a couple of years just to keep the deer off. It tolerates shade early on, but it's a critical host for um, lots of insects. And if we're trying to get 6,000 to 9,000 um, uh, caterpillars for a clutch of chickadees, I mean, one maple can go one red oak can go a long ways to producing to hosting that many caterpillars. Virgin's bower is a plant that Hoop Blossom is propagating this year and plan to have available. It's a native clematis, so that's pretty exciting. It has really beautiful flowers and seed pods, so you get some nice, attractive flowers in the landscape for a while. It's host plant to several moths, so it's a good food source for wildlife. It's a woody plant, so it's not only a perennial, but it will keep extending its reach, and vining. So it's really easy to train and trellis. So it's one of those native plants that that accommodates a highly cultivated landscape pretty quickly. I found it in fence rows on the island, and I identified it because it looked like this. It had this this really interesting seed, dried seed foliage, or not foliage, but dried seed feature going on. Other woody plants, red maple, aspen, birch, white pine are really great to plant. All of those are available. Actually, all of these, I think, are available through Chief River Nursery. Shrubs, dogwoods, the gray dogwood and red osier dogwood are really, really great native plants for birds. Viburnums, like the high bush cranberry, it's a native to Door County and the island. Juneberry, these are the amelanchier. A lot of the amelanchier, that's that really beautiful, one of the first flowering trees along fence rows and field edges in the early spring. Just a gorgeous plant. I think with all the junipers we have, it has a lot of cedar rust on it. Gathering Ground is actually going to be planting a variety that's meant to have some immunity to cedar rust. So hopefully they thrive well. Hazelnuts, nine bark, really great early flowers in the landscape. Elderberry, sumac, that's supposed to say bush honeysuckle. Bush honeysuckle is a plant that that Hoop Blossom will have available this spring as well. We hope to. They looked pretty good last fall. Bush honeysuckle is not the invasive honeysuckle. Bush honeysuckle is Diervilla lanicera, little yellow flower, and great for a kind of an edge with some sun right up next to the, again, it's that ditch